All right, Zig coming in on the top 10 of the show. We have Tim Lee and Sue Bauer from Bark. The Mississippi-based duo has been a staple of the DIY music scene. They have a new album out. It's called Loud. Tim and Sue both write songs. Sue plays drums. Tim plays baritone guitar and bass six. And it's a duo that's like got this low, maybe morphine type of undertones and like this passionate songwriting. And they both happen to be two of the nicest people in the world. After our conversation that you're about to hear, they sent me not only a vinyl of the new record, Loud, but the whole discography up into the Tim Lee 3 band, as well as the book Tim wrote called I Saw a Dozen Faces, a diary of the DIY music journey. One you should definitely check out, which is so sweet of them, and I really appreciate that. Thank you guys. Thank you for all the vinyl. Thank you for the book. Thank you for your time in this conversation. I also noticed Tim did a band with our friend Howard in that book. I got questions on that. Anywho, we're going to listen to a track. This is Rock Club off Loud, the band's Bark. Check it out. Rock Club, Bark's the band, Loud is the album, available now on all streaming platforms. Check it out. I also noticed these guys did a track with our friend Mike Baguetta. So definitely, these guys got good taste. You gotta dive into them. Bark. Check them out, friends. Before we get into this conversation, if you could like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast and any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Tim and Sue here. And with that being said, here's our conversation. Well, to kind of get into it, I wanted to start with knowing about the Windbreakers.
Well, that was a band I had in the 80s, me and a guy named Bobby Sutliff, who died this past year. We were in Jackson, Mississippi, and we were just these, goofy rock-obsessed kids that we really got into, like, the power pop thing, especially the 70s, kind of Big Star and Shoes and things of that nature. And but we were big Beatles fans and all that too. And so we had this band and we made a 7-inch EP and just sent them out in the world. And then we started making records with Mitch Easter and different people. And so we're on several independent labels of that era, and then toured pretty good bit, and but just beyond that, never we worked pretty hard, but we never got any farther than being on independent labels and riding around in ratty vans, sleeping on floor.
But it's like when you first start playing, you're like, man, I can't wait till we're in the van. You know what I mean? Like there's like those like moments where you're like, man, and then when you're in the van, you're like, when are we not going to be in the van? Like those moments of checks, Oh,
I absolutely loved it, and I still, like getting in the van and going places to play. So it's a lifelong thing. So.
Definitely agree on that. At that point, how long were you singing and playing?
Probably 10 years. Well, 8 or 9 years. I started playing guitar when I was like 13, and we started doing that stuff when I was in my early 20s.
Gotcha.
So,
and Susan, What about your music journey? Where did it start? Were you in a group too?
No, actually, I didn't start playing until the early 2000s, and it was a total. Like, I mean, I played piano when I was a kid. I took piano lessons like we all did. And that's our dog. He's for some reason. And like one morning in the early 2000s, I woke up on a Saturday morning and I said to Tim, I wanted to learn to play bass. And he got up and went to the pawn shop and bought me a bass and started teaching me how to play, and within about 6 months, we had a band together, and I was on stage.
Was that the Tim Lee 3?
It was first just the Tim Lee band, and because Tim was he had stepped away from it from most of the 90s, and we he had made a solo record at the beginning of the 2000s, and that was right about the time he did that was when I decided I wanted to play bass. So it initially started out as the Tim Lee band, and 4 people, and at one point it was 5 people, and then we when it became 3 people, me on bass, Tim playing guitar, and a drummer, that was when it became the Tim Lee 3, which was, what was that, 2006?
Yeah.
At 2006, because we suddenly had a gig in North Carolina that we really, 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 really wanted to do, because it involved opening for Steve Wynn and the Miracle 30. And and our drummer that we had didn't want to do it, so we got another drummer and became the Tim Lee 3.
Yeah.
Got it. It's those minor switches that, make the story murky, I mean, when you're reading about it, but in the moment makes so much sense. Like,
oh yeah, totally.
Very cool. Okay, so like, where did your guys' paths cross then? Like, how'd you guys meet?
Oh yeah.
We met of all places. We met at a fraternity house.
Yeah.
Yeah, at a college that neither one of us were going to. Small liberal arts college down in Jackson, Millsaps College. My brother was going to school there, and was a member of the. He was a Pike at Millsaps, and he was the entertainment chairman for Rush, and had hired Tim's band to play the final party at the end of Rush Week, and he had asked me to come and help serve, I guess, food or drink or whatever, and talk about how great everybody was. And we met that night. Tim and I did.
Yeah. So it was at a gig. That's awesome. And which band was it at that time?
That was a band called The Occasions. That was quite a while back.
And like,
that was pre-Windbreakers.
Okay, pre-Windbreakers. Like, so when you start playing, like, I totally get when you do music, it's like any gig is like, yes, you know what I mean? Like until you really get a flow of things going and a consistent, like, the idea that you can say no is such a scary, like, foreign idea. Like, oh, I guess I can say no to that gig. You're like, no, I need a gig. Yes, please.
Yeah.
So you wind up in all these different bands. Was that like up until the Windbreakers, or maybe even during the Windbreakers, Tim? Were you always in like multiple projects?
Not really, but where I grew up mostly was in Jackson, Mississippi, and at the time, nobody played original music. It was just unheard of. And
God, you couldn't make any money playing original music.
well, it's just there wasn't a place for it. There, you played dances and parties or whatever, and the next place you could go was the Coliseum if you were as big as Journey or some crap like that. But we just played it. But then as I started, going to different towns and going to see bands play at clubs and seeing, look, there's an opener that comes out and plays 50 minutes of their own stuff. I started pushing to do that. And then that's when everybody started going like, well, how are you going to make any money doing that? It's like, well, I didn't necessarily pick up a guitar because I thought I was going to make $1. Picked cool. And I think this is a cooler way of doing it. And so really, to my bands were the first bands around Jackson that were really doing original stuff and pushing it. So there was a friend of ours, Robert Crook, had a band called the Used Goods, and he found this little hole in the wall bar called Sidetracks, and he booked it there. And then somebody bought the place and changed the name to WC Don's, which stands for We Couldn't Decide on a Name.
Equally as good as Sidetracks. Sidetracks is a pretty good bar name.
Yeah, right next to the railroad tracks. It was very obvious. But so this old guy ended up owning it, and we just Susan and I went to him and said, hey, what if we bring touring bands in here? You sell beer and we'll charge $3 at the door. And he was amenable to that. So we we brought in Green on Red and Rain Parade, the Neats, the Liars, people like that. And
well, we sort of realized that we were going to a bunch of places to see original music, and we realized that where Jackson was situated, everybody had to come through Jackson, either on Highway 55 or 20.
Yeah.
It was basically a crossroads, and anybody that was touring in the South had to come through Jackson. So we started, Tim reached out to booking agents and like, we can provide a routing date, middle of the week, whatever. And it was great because, we didn't have to travel as much anymore to see people we wanted to see.
And it ended up people really were kind of hungry for that kind of thing. We usually had good crowds for this, and the bands made some money and they stayed at our house and we made a lot of lifelong friends.
Well, and that's the richness that money can't buy. You know what I mean? Like when you're traveling like that, to have the gig, to have a reason to be in Jacksonville or to be in any city is so important, especially when you're playing. So that's like you saw the need for it and made it. That's like the DIY ethos. That's it. That's so cool.
Yeah, and then we started putting out our own records, and just kind of get built on that, and here 800 years later, still doing it.
That's amazing. Well,
and putting them on, and getting in the van and going places to play. It just
That's so inspiring and so important, because knowing that there isn't a point in which it all ends, I think is important, and knowing that there's still a need for it, people still going there, and that's incredible because and that's also a lot of work. That end of it is tired because I work at an art gallery that books shows, right, and I run the sound and book that. And it's to go play everywhere and write your own music and work all day and be like, okay, we're here. What do you mean the microphone cable's broken? Who broke that? Oh, come on.
Exactly. It's
we keep everything around here.
That's a good call. Good call. So was there someone who was doing their own music that really inspired you, Tim or Susan, to write your own, to get that initial bite? Or was it just that there was none going on? You're like, that's where I want to do.
Well, for me, I just felt like, if I was going to play music, that's where I wanted to go with it. Because, playing in cover bands was never going to go beyond, that thing.
Right.
And I think the inspiration for starting to put out records and stuff is, right at the tail end of the 70s, there were these indie records, the first television single on Orc Records. And then Chris Stamey had his car label that put out Sneakers Records, and Chris Bell 45, and, Shoes out of Zion, Illinois put out their first album on their own that they recorded in their living room. So you would hear about these people doing these things, and, you figure, well, hell, if they can do it, why can't I? And so you just figure out a way to scrape up the money and do it. And then you send it out in the world and hope somebody hears it. And at that time, there was a certain openness to independent music. The 80s independent scene was really starting to coalesce into enough, fanzines that would write reviews and college radio stations that would play the record, and enough clubs to piece together a tour. And we just kind of got there at the right time, right as the door was being opened.
And kind of, it's interesting because I guess my through line of understanding with DIY stuff, you can, you're saying, I can really trace a lot of things to the 80s, but it's beyond that, I think of Ben Vaughn and some cats like that, but I'd really, that's the kind of, that's impeccable timing, as I guess how I want to say, the jump in on that. And the group what group would have been the Windbreakers that was jumping in on that for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. And because we had those we got the little records, 7-inch records that people were putting out. And you could tell from looking at them, these were not put out by Warner Brothers or somebody like that. There was definitely a DIY quality to them. But, and that inspired me way more than, people getting famous and playing coliseums and stuff.
Well, it's immediate community. You know what I mean? I was talking with Paul from the band Cinema about this not too long ago. The idea, like if you can kind of like support somebody and like welcome them in, it's like kind of being in on the joke. You know what I mean? And there's a sense of fun when you're like in on the joke, like an inside joke with a group, and it's a feeling that I don't. There's a feeling it's like no other when you're like, oh yeah, we're in this. And I think the DIY music community or the DIY whatever community is that. And when you're in it and when you see it grow and you see people from that go to those Coliseum gigs or whatever it be, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, we did it.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a thing for sure.
So from the Windbreakers, you did some stuff with Swimming Pool Q, or you played with them for a bit?
Yeah, they were an Atlanta band. They're still around actually, and but yeah, Susan and I moved back and forth to Atlanta a couple of times, and we were getting ready to move there in the late '80s, and their singer called me up and said they had a tour coming up and needed a bass player. And, and they were good friends of ours. And I was like, sure, I'm in, and I ended up playing with them for like 2 years, but the 3 weeks turned into 2 years. But yeah, and that was really cool. That was, because I had several kind of sideman gigs. I played with Mitch Easter's band, Let's Active, for a couple of tours, and played with Marty Jones on a tour. And so just these side meet gigs would come up, and, and it was, for me, it was good fun. You can actually get a paycheck to go play, but you could go out and it was another way to meet people. And
you were doing your solo stuff too, right?
Yeah, I would still be making records and doing whatever around that, but that was just another good way to get out into the world and, meet people,
right.
Which was what all about, was just going out and meeting people.
Well, because when you're doing that, as the side kind of, were you both playing bass in both bands, or was it bass in the Swimming Pool and like
Yeah, mostly I was like the guy that would get hired to play, guitar, the extra guitar and keyboard parts. So in the case of Mitch Easter's band, they were a 3-piece, but I would play the parts from the records that the 3-piece couldn't cover.
Gotcha. Well, but what's cool about that is you're not really in charge of booking the thing. You're kind of, you know what I mean? Like, I've done a handful.
Oh, yeah, you're along,
Yeah. And there's like a certain like relaxed quality to like, we're going where? You want to do that? All right. You know what I mean? Like, like there's a certain rolling when you're in that's like not leading role, that makes it seem way easier. Like, why would I ever lead anything? Holy crap, this is great. Like,
there's a lot of truth to that, but I'm also the guy that would end up, even if I was a side guy, half the time I ended up making the set list or going and dealing with the club owner at the end of the night or whatever. Just, I'm always used to just kind of taking charge, but in that case, you're not really taking charge, but you see that everybody else is busy, so you take care of what needs to be taken care of.
No, I totally get that. Like, there's a couple gigs I was in, bands I was in for a couple of years where I was like the bass player, just kind of side guy, but I'd be the first guy there. You know what I mean? Like, hey, nice to meet you. Like,
exactly.
There's a thing when and like, it's cool because that does open certain doors and you meet certain people and certain things like pan out, and it's super incredible when you see the guy you met from that gig show up at the whatever other gig, you know what I mean? Like, so those are all like valuable like things to be doing, and you can kind of see how another whole team runs their operation.
Yeah,
that's always fascinating to see how people like because we don't do this with business in mind, but there's certain things you have to do, to conduct business, I guess. And I'm always fascinated by how different artists or bands or whatever, how they conduct their business. It's an interesting topic,
Is there like through working with through siding some of these gigs, has there been any like kind of tricks of the trade you brought over to how you handle it?
It's a good question. Yeah, because when I toured with Let's Active, that was pretty early on, and they had a road manager, Cliff Atchison, who was very organized. And so I just I watched him a lot, and just simple things like having, a sheet of where all you're going that week and how long, how far it is and where you're staying, and just having this organized view of what was coming up. Just little things like that just make your life a little bit easier, and seeing how they handle per diems or whatever, their per diems might have been 5 times more than yours, but, it was just for me, it was good to be able to go out and early on and pick up on how that end of it is handled. Because the music is the music, you write up a set list, you play the songs. But unless you're, somebody that puts on a show or something, and has to have the flames and explosions.
The pyrotechnics.
Yeah. So it was definitely.
That's okay. Those are all good things to take away though, when you don't, and like having a clear set thing is really important. It's one of those Doy things like, oh yeah, we should have wrote that down. You know what I mean? You don't think about it until you see someone do it right. But my friends from Austin, Texas, they play in a band called Two Player, and they were in a bigger band called Full Service, but they put it out in a way where it's like you do 2% of everything is actually playing music. The rest of it is everything else.
Oh yeah. Yeah. 1 hour out of the day is where you're actually doing the thing you're there to do.
Yeah.
The rest of the day is getting to there and getting away from there to the next one.
That's the majority of it.
Yeah.
So let's kind of work our way to Bark. Now, if that was the dog barking, that was impeccable.
He's
sorry. So Susan, when did you switch to drums?
About 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a health issue that was making it difficult for me to continue to play bass. And I wasn't ready to quit playing an instrument altogether. Anyway, so I was like, I could learn how to play drums. That would be, easier, I thought. The guy that had been playing drums with us in the Timley 3 actually taught drums to kids. So he agreed to give me some lessons, and he, gave me all of his copies of all of his charts and stuff that he used to teach the kids. And I started, I just, from there, he got me started, and then I worked at it. And then I had one of those aha moments, the rhythms that I had been playing, I realized how they actually should sound. And, Limb Independence, that was an aha moment. And then I was, our practice space was in the basement of our house. We were living in Knoxville at the time. And I would be practicing like playing along with like Creedence Clearwater Revival songs, because those drums are like really straightforward and really easy to feel. And Tim could hear me upstairs, and he came down. This is the origin story of Bark, because he he came down to the basement one day and said, I want to play with you. And I was like, okay, let's, we sort of started jamming, air quotes around jamming. And
we started making up songs.
Yeah. And we were like, oh, this is a thing. And then we both, I think it happened simultaneously. We both said what would be perfect for this situation would be a bass six. And it was. That's what made Bark. Gave Bark its unique sound.
That's cool. That's awesome. So like through switching it, this whole new thing opens, and like I think in most creative endeavors, that's when those things pop out, and like because the bass six, that's just like because I was looking at it, I'm like it looks like a baritone guitar, but it's not. It's a 6-string bass, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like a baritone guitar that's a whole octave lower, so it's tuned E to E, but a whole octave lower than a guitar. So, like if you play up at the 12th fret, you're playing the same range as a guitar.
Yeah, that's sick. Yeah, that's cool.
Like, let the A string ring while you're playing up around the, 14th fret, and you're getting all of that range at the same time.
He's basically and guitar at the same time. That's what it
sometimes.
Most of the time, yeah. What it sort of has evolved into is that, because if he's hitting on that low E string and then playing, chords or melody on the other strings, he is playing bass and guitar at the same time. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, that makes so much more sense because I read bass six and I'm like, because I just garbage picked a baritone guitar. And me and my dad fixed it up, and like I'm like maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what I'm hearing because I like to listen to this stuff before before reading about it. And
I do capo, some of the time. So a lot of it ends up being in the baritone range because I'll capo to the 5th fret or whatever. So
that's a full sound, and that's so sick. That's so sick. So like I guess so Bark comes out of like you playing drums and like let's do something. Does the writing process Tim, you've been writing songs for a while. Like do you have a process that you go to, or is it always kind of a collaboration of who you're working with?
It varies. I mean, I'd say with Susan and I both, songs generally start with the words, and then the music comes later. I think Susan probably hears the music in her head earlier than I do. Because if I hear it in my head, I won't remember it when I pick up an instrument. Yeah. And whatever chord I play is pretty much what I'll follow.
Right.
And that's just, it's one of those things. I've been writing songs for 40 some odd years, and so if there's an idea, I can follow through on it usually. It may not be a great song, but at least, I have the practice to be able to write a complete song. And because, writing songs is like anything. You have to practice it. When I was really young, I spent a lot of time practicing. I spent probably more time practicing songwriting than I did practicing guitar. And so...
Well, I think that's so it's so much harder to do, like, because like I set aside a time every day to practice the instruments and then practice the writing aspect of it, and like it can be such an uphill battle where you're like, where did I go with verse 2? Like
and I tend to go with a lot of autopilot, again because I've done it for so long. A lot of times I will just, start writing and just write, and then go back and look at it and see what makes sense out of it or doesn't. And I may just throw it away, but
right.
It's part of the process, I guess, just to get the bad stuff out of your system while you're trying to get the good stuff.
Right. Well, no, I think that's incredibly important, is just to write. Is it, so you do just like write lyrics on your own time, like at not playing music, and then kind of take it, or is it inspiration where it's like, float, that's a cool idea for a song, and then dive into it? You know what I mean? Like, Even though, Susan, I don't know if you wrote that one, but I know you sang it.
Yeah.
I wrote it, and Tim. I mean, we change things or suggest things or whatever in each other's songs. So we credit both of us. But that one probably took about. I started writing it right before the pandemic. So it sort of turned into the most pandemic song that was written before the pandemic. But I pretty much finished it, I think, by the end of the year.
And see, I would never do that. It's like, if I don't have something I can call a song in 10 minutes, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Got it.
He does.
It's like the Joe Strummer lyrics are like lettuce idea.
Yeah.
Like they go bad unless you use them.
Yeah.
But on the complete opposite end, like Leonard Cohen's approach is like he's working on songs for 10 years, so there's no wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
Oh no, not at all.
Yeah.
No, they're all totally legitimate. I don't have that kind of patience.
I get it.
I get frustrated with a song if it doesn't want to act right in the beginning.
I feel that. Like when you hear it, but you can't get it out. You're like, what?
Yeah. Or you get it, you just go, wow, that really isn't very good, is it? There's no amount of polishing is going to fix that turd.
That's true too. And then you gotta let it go. You're like, but this could be the thing I want it to be, but it's just not.
Yeah.
So you guys are writing tunes for Bark. There's a couple tunes I wanted to ask about. Rock Club. I really like how the background vocals are very Talking Heads kind of sounding. And that after talking with you guys for a little bit and getting that whole narrative of like how you basically ran a whole scene, that song resonates much more clearly. Can you tell me a little bit about how that one came up?
Yeah, I think that one started out me kind of, as odd and sort of pretentious as it sounds, me kind of writing a letter to myself. And, you stay up too late and you drink too much. And then, because the Rock Club is, my favorite place to go, and I like being that old guy at the back of the room at the Wednesday night punk rock show,
Yeah.
And I think I just kind of, I wasn't scolding myself, as I was just kind of amazed at how much I still like to do that. And still, I do like to see live music, and I like to see it in a club. I don't really enjoy concerts and things with assigned seating and big shows. I like small, intimate, loud things. And, so yeah, it just kind of started like that. And then, it kind of took on a life of its own. After it got started, it kind of wrote itself, I think. Credit.
Well, I think that one, because there's so much, I agree that type of experience is way more personal, and you really feel like you're in it. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
And because we have this venue out in Cleveland called the Music Box, and it's a great venue. But there's assigned seating, and you sit at a table in an assigned seat, and for a lot of the acts you see there, that's clutch. You're like, okay, cool. But I saw X there, and I'm like, I don't want to sit down and watch X. I want to be up front, moving.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, so there's, I definitely relate to that, and it's one of those things where rock feels like it has an age limit, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? And I
think if it does, self-imposed.
Yeah.
I think side.
I'm too old to do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot in that song about when you think you're too old, you're not gonna have much fun. It's like people convince themselves of that all the time, and I think more than convincing themselves they're not gonna have fun, I think they forget how much fun it is. Because I think most people like my age, they like having an assigned seat and a comfortable place with a clean bathroom and, clear sight lines and all that stuff. I totally get that. It's just, that's not what excites me, I like seeing music with a dozen other people. That's where I'm comfortable.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's well said. I think like you kind of put that norm out there from the beginning. You know what I mean? Maybe as a kid you don't notice how gross the bathroom is, but I think everyone hates gross bathrooms. Like,
Yeah, like there are worse things, I guess.
But that's a great tune. That one really struck with me. Like this whole album's great. I know I'm sorry I'm picking certain ones to dive into, but the whole album it sounds really good, and it's amazing that it's just the two of you doing this. And like the other one I wanted to ask about was I'm a loser, not a fighter. The first track. I know it's not called that. I don't think.
Called
But that that line, and like you used it in the one sheet, and I think that's such like a powerful like kind of like not statement but play like philosophy in a way. Can you kind of dive into like, was that like the what am I looking at, song seed that planted that song in particular, or is that like something that came out of the writing of it?
It came out of the writing. That song is very definition of something inspiring, because I literally was getting frustrated at not writing songs. Hadn't written any lately, and I literally picked up a piece of paper and a pen and wrote, "It's just words on a page," and that was the first line of the song. And then that muse or whatever just took over, and I just wrote, and in no time 90% of it was there probably. And every line just came out of that burst of inspiration of like my frustration making me write. It's just words on a page. And then I kept going. And then, I'm real, I guess I'm proud of it. I'm proud of that. I'm a loser, not a fighter thing. And also I want to burn it down, but I can't find a lighter. I mean, it's kind of like it's the frustration. Once I got it going, it kind of, mirrored the frustration of being like, a standard issue white guy in a world where other people are, suffering and having to put up with shit that I'll never have to put up with, and so, I kind of joke that it's about being a terrible ally, the song. But once it got going, that's what, the inspiration became.
Well, I think that's because there's so much like you're saying, there's so much stuff like you can't do stuff about, but you can, but how do you do like, and even just that, taking it to the frustration of creativity, right? You have all this like thing I want to do, I just don't know how I want it to sound or what I want it to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's a like quintessential lesson of just doing it. Like that song came from just doing it, whatever, just start the thing. Like there's so much, and they kind of build it into like, there's a lot of, at least I work with a lot of kids and a lot of like people in general with like anxiety, and they're afraid to do the thing because they're afraid to do it wrong. And because it's scary to do it wrong, but also like, you gotta start somewhere. You gotta fall and get back up. You gotta like scrape the shins or whatever. Like, and like it comes from that first doing it. But a lot of times, I think once you do it, that's what happens. And like, that's the fire and the lighter line. The company, that couplet right there is a really good like other metaphor of that.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful tune, man, and it rocks.
Yeah, we have a video for it that'll actually be coming out.
Yeah,
in another week and a half or so.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
awesome. So a lot of this was kind of like a pre-pandemic tunes, or like during the pandemic, a lot of these tunes came to fruition, or what was that like time frame looking like?
We were playing a few of them before the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, the last record, Terminal Everything, came out right before the pandemic, like in November of
19.
19. Yeah. And I think we've had this habit, and Tim even had this habit before I started playing. Before you even get a record out, you're already writing new songs. And I think that a lot of these things, several of these things were already happening, were in our live set.
Yeah.
When Terminal Everything came out. And Terminal Everything was such a emotional thing, because that came out. That record was influenced a lot by my dad passing expectedly, and then 10 days later, Tim's mom passing unexpectedly. And at the time we weren't back in Mississippi, we were in Knoxville, but so I was doing a lot of back and forth with my parents, and so it just sort of turned into this whole thing, and it became Terminal Everything, and so once we got past that, I think the songwriting was a lot slower.
A lot slower.
It was a lot slower, mainly because we had the pandemic, and we had gotten a lot of emotional stuff out on Terminal Everything. So I think there were a few things, but we were really more not playing and just sort of kind of
pandemicing. Because we were in the middle of going out and playing and supporting, Terminal Everything when everything ground to a halt.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of a weird thing that, unlike most bands, we lived in the same house and we rehearsed in the basement, so we could keep playing,
mm-hmm.
but we couldn't go anywhere and play. And while we had that time to just play, is like a lot of songs like Love Minus Action and Work in Progress, a lot of those came along during that time.
Mm-hmm.
Rock Club, I think, was probably part of that too.
Yeah.
Things that, like I said, we had not, that we just, we had the time to do it, so we did it.
Yeah.
I guess what it boiled down to.
Yeah.
God, but and I think having that time, and I think a lot of people utilize that to do, especially bands utilize that to get the thing out, whatever the tunes that were floating, and then it's like but what I love about that is it doesn't sound like a pandemic record. Like there's gonna be a pandemic record sound. It's gonna be melancholy and lo-fi. It's gonna be, when we look back, there will be a flood of records that are going to be that.
Yeah. Remember how many lo-fi home recordings of ironic 70s covers came out during the pandemic?
Yeah.
Explain to me what that was all about.
Going through the record collection you put aside, no one wanted to dive into, I guess, and then they dove into it. They're like, "Oh, my aunt's records are sweet."
Yeah,
maybe, I don't know.
We ordered the record during the pandemic. We were still living in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we'd gotten to know Matt Patton and Bronson Tew, who had the Dialback studio here in Water Valley where we live now, and just gotten to know them from them come to our shows, and we played in the area, and it just seemed like they'd be cool guys to record with, and nobody else that we usually worked with were really, recording, and they had a system whereby they would do kind of a pod, and so, and with us just being two of us, it was pretty easy to do that. And so we came over here to Water Valley twice and recorded with them. And so it was an interesting, kind of world where, if you wanted somebody to play on something, you'd send the track to them and they'd record it at home and send it back and that kind of thing. Whereas in the past, we'd usually just, come meet us at the studio. We'll have a good time. Blah blah blah. It's just like, like Jimbo Mathis played on one song. He lives like real near here, and he saw on Facebook or something that we record, and he dropped in, and we got him to play. But for the most part, it was stuff that Susan and then Matt and Bronson and Schaefer Yana was assistant engineer. And so it was just the five of us in there most of the time. And Matt engineered most of the backing vocals. Those were mostly his, where there's group vocals and stuff. He's really sharp with that and has a lot of fun with it. And I think you pick up on how fun a lot of the backing vocals are.
Yeah, I think so. I think
but it was cool. And then, it's just taken us a while to get around to putting it out because, right after not long after the pandemic, we ended up moving, and we're back here in Mississippi now. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, we need to put this record out.
Yeah, we started what?
Year and a half or something like that. Yeah, which is not our usual style.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I get it because as soon as you're done with the one, the next one's already cooking. Is that the case for you guys? They got one kind of rounding the corner of being recorded, or?
No, we both kind of, after we finished that one, both kind of hit some dry spells, and then like I said, we spent a lot of time moving and getting resettled and all, and have just started working on new songs. We've got 3 new ones that we're working on. And,
oh, there you go. That's a third of the way there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. We usually, by this point, we would have had an album's worth of songs and then some. So It feels to me like we haven't done anything. But these are we're really kind of itching to record them and maybe just throw them out there as an EP or something.
Well, that's exciting. That's awesome. Is it same instrumental setup? You still using the bass V6?
Yeah, the bass, drums, and the basics is a challenge because you've got to figure out how to not make every song sound exactly the same.
Right.
And
right.
Fun playing with it, and especially when you just have 2 instruments, and drums sound like drums, and bass 6 sounds like bass 6, and I use more effects with the bass 6 than I would playing standard guitar. Just but it's a fun challenge, but I think these 3 new songs probably don't sound like anything on any of the previous records.
No.
So it's exciting when you can break out something that does feel different to you than what you've done before.
Well, that's it's interesting because I find myself playing in a lot of open tunings, right? Just doing that thing, to do that, to purposely kind of throw off that process of how you would normally just throw a progression together, or some type of musicality, and you do find yourself doing a lot of the same bits at first because you're like, oh, it's all in D, or whatever. So but then comes those little well, if I do this, I don't even know where I'm at now,
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the thing I'm always fascinated by is especially when people start writing songs young, they go through the phase of feeling like they have to invent chords.
Yeah. Yeah.
Phase that already exist. You just found a new way to put your fingers.
Yeah.
There was a while at Knoxville where I was actually doing a reasonable amount of kind of studio work, getting called in to play on people's records, and people that have 3 capos in different places. You just get you're playing, and they go this one. Oh, you're playing a C. That's great. You've done this, and you've engineered this ingenious way to play that chord.
And I get, maybe in the club, it looks like it becomes like a busking thing. You're like, oh, I got people's attention because I'm doing a weird thing, even though it's something simple, right? It's it's a different way to kind of work that game of it. But when it comes to recording, you're like, oh, it's just a C.
Yeah, it's it's all sleight of hand. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Smoke and mirrors, dirty.
Yeah, that's right. Alan didn't have to do all those things he did, but it sure made it cooler that he did.
For sure. Yeah. And that's part of the entertainment aspect of it. You know, you got to have fun doing it. And like, it could be fun to do something in a completely different way and get lost in that again. It's like beginner's mind in that sense.
Oh yeah.
But that's incredible. I mean, the record's really good, and I'm excited that the next one is in the works. Are you guys planning to hit some out of town dates with this record?
Yeah, definitely. We've got like 18 dates between now and the end of the year.
Nice.
My pardon me, my day gig is I'm a production director for a public radio program down here, and it has a fall season that kind of ties me up every Thursday. So until the middle of November, we're really just going out and playing weekends. But then late November, early December, we will do a couple of weeks, up and down the East Coast and wherever else we can get to. So
nice. What's your show?
What's our show?
Yeah, the radio show.
It's called the Thacker Mountain Radio Hour. It's on Mississippi Public Broadcasting and Alabama Public Radio and
Tennessee.
Yes, some stations in Tennessee and one in New Mexico. But it's cool. It's a 1 hour live show that's it's based out of Oxford, Mississippi. So there's always an author on there talking about their book and reading from it, and then 2 musical acts that both play like 3 songs or something. And it runs the gamut from, singer-songwriters to blues artists to gospel choirs to you name it, And yeah, it's fun. I basically book the music and stage manage.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it's taking all that DIY stuff and putting it there. That's so awesome.
Yeah. So that's what I told somebody when they told me about the job. I'm like, oh, somebody actually gets paid to do what I do all the time for nothing.
I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. That's so cool, man. Well, guys, thank you so much for chatting with me, and I hope if you come by Cleveland that I can catch you live.
Okay, yeah. We may hit you up for a gig sometime.
Yeah, no, please do.
He had a Cleveland gig booked for the spring of 2020.
Yeah.
Do you know Dave Swanson?
Is he a bass player?
No, I think he's a guitar player, but I think he was in Guided by Voices at one time or Death of some of those bands, but and I can't remember his current band, but he always has a couple of bands and he does a radio show on one of the stations there, but we were going to do something with one of his bands and I can't even remember where it was at this point, but then of course the pandemic happened and it didn't. Bark has never played Cleveland. We've played Columbus and Cincinnati, but never Cleveland. So.
Okay. Well, keep my number and when you're working your way up here, we'll try to figure something out because there's.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.